Jack and Emma seemed like the ideal couple. They had been married for a few wonderful years, each one growing closer and more comfortable with each other. Jack admired Emma's natural beauty and loved her confidence. To him, her lively spirit and genuine smile were more than enough. They were the things that drew him to her in the first place. However, over time, Jack's attention started to shift. Small comments here and there hinted at a change in his perspective. One evening, after a typical day, he looked at Emma a bit differently, subtly suggesting she might look better if she made a few improvements. It was barely noticeable at first, a passing comment about her appearance, maybe a suggestion to try a different hairstyle or outfit. But as days went by, these suggestions became more frequent, hinting at a growing dissatisfaction he tried to mask with a smile. Emma, sensing the change, initially brushed it off, but Jack's subtle hints didn't stop. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking for something different, something she didn't fully understand yet. Little did she know, this growing fixation of Jack's would lead them both down a path she'd never expected, a path that would ultimately challenge everything she thought she knew about her marriage and herself. And so, with each passing day, Emma was drawn unknowingly closer to a life-altering transformation, all in the name of satisfying the person she loved most. Jack's subtle criticisms grew louder over time, and Emma couldn't ignore the changes in him. What started as a few passing remarks slowly turned into frequent pointed comments. His words were never directly hurtful, but the undertone was clear. "Maybe you should try a different style," he'd say, or, "Why not try a more intense workout?" Initially, Emma shrugged it off, thinking it was just Jack's way of being helpful, but his remarks became harder to brush aside. One evening, Jack brought it up directly during dinner. Setting down his fork, he looked at her and said, "You know, Emma, you'd look a lot better if you worked on a few things." His voice was calm, almost as if he thought he was doing her a favor by saying it. Emma's stomach sank. She didn't know how to respond. Here was the man she loved. The man who once made her feel perfect just as she was, now telling her she should change. Over the next few weeks, Jack's demands became even more specific. He started leaving articles for her on the kitchen counter, pages ripped from health magazines about strict diets and exercises that promised fast, dramatic results. "Just take a look," he'd say nonchalantly. But his intent was clear. It wasn't enough that Emma felt good about herself. Jack wanted to shape her into someone else entirely. The pressure was mounting, and Emma started to feel like she was losing control. She found herself in front of the mirror, examining her appearance, trying to see herself through Jack's eyes. Why did he suddenly want her to change so much? She had been happy, confident in who she was, and Jack had always told her he loved her that way. Now, it seemed like nothing she did was enough. One day, as she was folding laundry, Jack casually mentioned a new workout class he'd heard about. "It's high intensity," he said, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed. "Just what you need to see some real results." Emma felt a chill run through her. The class was intense and designed for those aiming for major physical changes. She couldn't help but feel his underlying message. "You're not good enough as you are?" Emma felt like she was at a crossroads, torn between wanting to make Jack happy and staying true to herself. She started to wonder if he even saw her for who she was anymore, or if she had become some kind of project to him, something he could mold to fit his image of perfection. In her quiet moments, doubts filled her mind. Why would Jack, who once seemed to love her exactly as she was, now be so fixated on changing her? She replayed his comments in her head, searching for answers. The Jack she'd fallen in love with had always been supportive, always making her feel secure and cherished. But this new Jack, this version who scrutinized her every move and seemed constantly dissatisfied, felt like a stranger. Emma didn't know what had changed in him, or if she was the one changing. And so, she was left in limbo, questioning everything: her choices, her confidence, and even her worth. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. Jack's demands would soon push her to a place she never thought she'd go. Emma took a deep breath as she stared at herself in the mirror. She could hardly believe she was considering changing herself, just to make Jack happy. But his words had planted seeds of doubt. Maybe, she thought, if she could look the way he wanted, they could regain that closeness they once had. So, reluctantly, she started making small adjustments, hoping it would rekindle his love and appreciation. At first, Emma altered her diet, cutting out foods she loved in favor of strict meal plans Jack had recommended. Salads, protein shakes, and carefully measured portions replaced her favorite comfort meals. She felt hungry and frustrated, but told herself it was worth it. And at Jack's insistence, she joined that intense workout class, pushing her body to the limits in ways she had never imagined. Each day, she left the gym, exhausted, muscles aching, feeling like she'd given a piece of herself away. Jack's reaction was only mildly positive, barely a nod of approval, but it was enough to keep her going. However, Jack wasn't satisfied with just a few changes. He began pushing her toward more drastic transformations, hinting that a real commitment to her appearance would make a difference. He even suggested cosmetic procedures, something Emma had never even considered. At first, she resisted, shocked that he would suggest such a thing, but Jack's persistence wore her down. After countless conversations where he expressed his concerns about her appearance, Emma reluctantly agreed to one small, non-invasive procedure. She reasoned that it was harmless, just a minor adjustment. But once she crossed that line, Jack seemed even more determined to push her further. As Emma made more changes, she began feeling disconnected from herself. Her reflection in the mirror was different. She was different. She wasn't just altering her body. She was surrendering bits of herself. But she pressed on, hoping Jack would finally see her as enough. Each time she questioned whether this was truly worth it, Jack's expectations loomed over her, pushing her to continue. Emma told herself that love sometimes meant sacrifice, but in quiet moments, doubt crept in. She wondered if she had already given up too much of herself for Jack's approval. But Jack was still unsatisfied. With each change, his praise was faint, and his requests grew. She could feel herself slipping further away from who she once was, caught in a cycle of endless modifications. Her friends grew concerned, noticing how withdrawn and unlike herself she had become. Emma brushed off their comments, insisting she was fine, but in reality, she felt trapped. Her journey to please Jack had morphed into something far more consuming than she had anticipated. She was caught in a dangerous cycle, one that had taken over her life and spirit, and as she continued to push herself further, she was unaware that this transformation was leading her down a path that was far more dangerous than she or Jack could have ever foreseen. Emma's body was beginning to show signs of the strain. What had started as small changes had now spiraled into an exhausting routine. She felt sore constantly, and her energy was drained. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and she began experiencing headaches and fatigue that left her struggling to keep up with even the simplest tasks. It was as though her body was waving red flags, warning her to slow down. But Jack, blind to her suffering, brushed off her concerns, urging her to just keep going a little longer. Every time Emma expressed how drained she felt, Jack barely listened. "You're doing great," he'd say dismissively. "Just push a little harder." His indifference stung. Despite the toll on her health, Jack's praise remained faint, almost dismissive, as if he didn't see how much she was sacrificing for him. Instead of acknowledging her efforts, he focused only on what she hadn't achieved yet. "We're almost there," he'd say, as if they were on some collective journey, though he bore none of the burden. Emma's friends and family couldn't ignore her physical changes. At a family gathering, her mother pulled her aside, her voice laced with concern. "Emma, you don't look well. Are you sure everything's all right?" Emma forced a smile, brushing it off as just stress, but deep down, she felt her own doubts growing. Her friends began asking similar questions. "You look exhausted," one friend pointed out gently. "Is everything okay with you and Jack?" They noticed her thinning frame, her pale complexion, and the emptiness in her eyes. Yet, Emma found herself in an unbreakable loop of self-doubt and desperation to please Jack. Despite the warnings from loved ones, She clung to Jack's approval like it was her only lifeline, afraid to let go and admit the toll it was taking. Her friends begged her to take a step back, to listen to what her body was telling her. But whenever she tried to pull back, Jack's words echoed in her mind, pushing her to stay on the path. "We're almost there," he'd remind her, as though reaching some imaginary finish line. In the quiet moments when she was alone, Emma's mind was filled with questions she couldn't shake. Why was he so obsessed with these changes? What did he truly want from her? The Jack she once knew had loved her as she was, but this new version of him seemed consumed by an obsession she couldn't understand. The doubts and questions lingered in her mind, whispering that something deeper might be driving Jack's demands, something that went far beyond simple preferences. The strain on her health grew harder to ignore. She felt trapped, torn between her own instincts and Jack's relentless pursuit of perfection. The mystery of Jack's intentions loomed large, leaving Emma feeling like she was slowly unraveling. And with each passing day, it was becoming more clear that Jack's fixation was leading her down a path with no clear end, only deeper sacrifice. As Emma pushed further, she felt herself slipping away from everything and everyone she knew. Jack's relentless demands began to alienate her from her friends, who grew tired of watching her suffer under the weight of his expectations. Invitations to gatherings dwindled, her phone rarely buzzed with messages, and even family members stopped reaching out as much. The people who had once been her support system saw her fading, but she was too deep in Jack's world to see it. Physically, she was worn down, but the emotional toll was even greater. Emma's reflection felt like that of a stranger, someone drained of energy and stripped of her former confidence. She'd once felt at home in her own skin, but now she couldn't recognize herself. Each demand Jack made seemed to erode a part of her, leaving her isolated and alone, even in her own mind. She spent countless hours trying to live up to Jack's standards, with every ounce of energy going toward a goal she didn't even fully understand. At night, she lay awake, haunted by doubts and insecurities that Jack had embedded deep in her mind. One evening, Emma was alone in their home, tidying up after another exhausting day. She stumbled upon something strange in Jack's study, a document she hadn't seen before. She hesitated, but curiosity got the better of her. As she skimmed the pages, her eyes widened in shock. The document contained financial calculations, insurance details, and notes on physical enhancements, all linked to her name. She felt her heart sink as she realized what it meant. Jack had been fixated on these transformations because, to him, they had monetary value. The more she changed, the more she met a certain ideal that was worth something to him. Not in love or admiration, but in tangible financial gain. Emma's breath caught as she processed this revelation. The man she had trusted, the man she had changed herself for, was driven not by love, but by greed. It wasn't about her happiness or even her well-being. It was about how he could profit from her appearance. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Jack had manipulated her into becoming his personal project, all to feed his selfish ambitions. As the pieces clicked together, Emma's anger began to simmer. She remembered all the grueling workouts, the painful sacrifices, the invasive procedures, all the things she had done just to make Jack happy. And here, laid bare, were his true motives. It was never about her, only about what she could become for him. She was a means to an end in his eyes, her worth reduced to numbers and calculations on a piece of paper. That night, Emma's mind raced. She felt betrayed, used, and hollowed out, but underneath the pain, a spark of determination ignited. For the first time in months, she looked at herself with a clear perspective. Jack's obsession was his own creation, and she had been caught in his web for far too long. This realization was devastating, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. She knew she couldn't continue down this path, not for Jack, and certainly not for his hidden agenda. Emma's transformation was nearly complete, but not in the way Jack had envisioned. This wasn't just physical. She was finding a strength within herself she had almost forgotten. And as she stood there, holding that incriminating document, she realized that Jack's hold on her was slipping. He could demand, push, and criticize all he wanted, but he no longer had control over her spirit. And as Emma's transformation progressed, Jack's motives unraveled before her, leaving her with a newfound purpose: to reclaim the person she had been all along. The path forward would be challenging, but Emma now knew that she was done sacrificing herself for someone who only saw her as a means to an end. Jack had pushed her too far, and he was about to learn that the very person he had tried to reshape was more powerful than he'd ever realized. Emma's world had been shattered by the discovery of Jack's motives, but a new sense of urgency filled her. She knew that if she stayed in this situation any longer, she would lose herself completely. The woman she had once been, confident, loved, and at peace, was barely a memory. Now she felt desperate to escape from Jack's influence, but the years of manipulation had taken a toll. Breaking free wasn't going to be easy. Each day became a test of her resolve. Jack continued his relentless pressure, oblivious to the fact that Emma now knew the truth. Every time he made a comment about her appearance or hinted at another improvement, Emma felt her patience wearing thin. She wanted to confront him, to scream and demand answers, but something held her back. She needed a plan, a way to separate herself from him without giving him the satisfaction of knowing how deeply he'd hurt her. Quietly, Emma began making small changes. She limited her interactions with Jack, becoming less and less responsive to his comments. When he noticed her withdrawal, he tried to regain control, suggesting that she take on even more intense routines and treatments. But this time, she stood firm, refusing in subtle ways that Jack couldn't easily challenge. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of her old strength returning, giving her the courage to envision a life outside of his grasp. The isolation had been difficult, but it had also made her realize something important. She was the only one who could save herself. Her friends and family had warned her, but in the end, it was her decision to break free. She had been so focused on pleasing Jack that she had ignored the harm it was causing her, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. Emma began to understand that her true worth had nothing to do with Jack's superficial demands. It was time to reclaim her life and find out who she was beyond his toxic expectations. In her desperation, Emma started preparing for a new beginning. She reached out to a few close friends, people she knew she could trust, and shared a glimpse of what she'd been going through. Their support gave her the final push she needed. They reminded her of the woman she used to be, the one who was full of laughter, energy, and independence. These connections rekindled her hope and solidified her plan to escape Jack's influence once and for all. With her mindset, Emma faced Jack one last time, not as the broken woman he had shaped, but as a person who had found her strength. She was done compromising, done sacrificing, and finally ready to start anew. This was her chance to break free from the shadows of Jack's greed and take back her life for good. With her plan in motion, Emma began the long journey to reclaim her life. She moved out, leaving behind the world Jack had constructed around her, and stepping into a new chapter of independence. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of relief, as if a weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. But the path ahead wasn't easy. The emotional scars Jack had left behind would take time to heal. Emma's first focus was on restoring her health. The extreme routines and restrictions she had endured for Jack's approval had taken a toll on her body, and now she was dedicated to nurturing herself back to wellness. She found joy in small steps, eating foods she had once loved, rediscovering gentle forms of exercise that didn't feel like punishment, and reconnecting with activities that brought her happiness. Her body, once exhausted and strained, began to recover, and she felt her strength returning day by day. More than just her physical health, Emma worked on rebuilding her spirit. She joined supportive groups and reconnected with friends who had stood by her even when she had been too isolated to notice. These people reminded her of who she was, independent of Jack's demands or expectations. With their encouragement, Emma found herself smiling and laughing again, things she hadn't realized she'd lost in the years spent under Jack's control. As she began to heal, Emma realized that her journey was about more than leaving Jack. It was about rediscovering herself. She saw that the true transformation she needed wasn't physical but internal, a renewal of the confidence, joy, and sense of self-worth she had once had. Jack's words no longer held power over her, and she found a freedom in simply being herself, no longer striving to meet anyone else's standards. Emma's path forward was filled with hope. She knew there would be difficult days, but for the first time in a long while, she was in control of her own life. She had reclaimed her identity and found the strength to build a future that was hers alone, free from the shadows of the past. And as she moved forward, she held on to the lesson she had learned, that true happiness came from within, and no one could take that from her again. As Emma moved on, Jack's life began to unravel in her absence. He had always taken for granted that Emma would stay, believing his influence over her was unbreakable. But with Emma gone, he felt the emptiness of a house once filled with her warmth and presence. He barely recognized his own life without her, and it began to dawn on him how much he had lost. At first, Jack dismissed her departure as temporary, assuming she would return once she realized how much she needed him. But as the weeks turned into months, he started to feel the sting of her absence. He found himself thinking back to the beginning, to the woman who had loved him without conditions, who had been so full of joy and energy. Slowly, regret started to seep in, and he realized that he had destroyed the very qualities in Emma that had once made her so unique. Jack tried to distract himself, but the reality of his actions haunted him. He reached out to friends, but they were wary, having seen the toll he had taken on Emma over the years. His social circle grew smaller as people distanced themselves, unable to overlook the way he had manipulated her. Even his family, who had once admired Emma, began to question Jack's behavior, reminding him of what he'd let slip through his fingers. He was left to confront his actions alone, with no one to validate his choices or shield him from the weight of his own mistakes. One evening, Jack sat alone in the dark, scrolling through photos of Emma from before everything had changed. There she was, smiling, her natural beauty shining through, untouched by the demands he had imposed on her. For the first time, he saw clearly how much of herself she had lost because of him. He remembered every suggestion, every harsh word, and every time he had pushed her to change, and he realized with crushing clarity that the person he had tried to reshape was the one who had loved him most purely, the one who had brought true happiness into his life. As the memories flooded back, Jack felt the weight of his regret. He wished he could take it all back, to undo the damage and make things right. But it was too late. Emma had found her own strength, her independence, and she had moved on without him. She had given him every chance, and he had ignored each one, always thinking she would stay. Now, Jack was left alone, haunted by the realization that he had lost the only person who had ever truly cared for him. His regret was heavy, but the door to redemption had closed. Emma's happiness was no longer his to influence, and Jack was left to face the consequences of his actions, alone and filled with remorse. Emma's new life was filled with peace, confidence, and self-respect, things she had rediscovered on her own journey. Free from Jack's influence, she embraced each day with renewed energy, pursuing goals that brought her genuine happiness. Surrounded by supportive friends and family, Emma had built a life that reflected her true self, thriving in ways she hadn't imagined possible. She was finally free, finding strength in her own choices and self-love, no longer bound by anyone else's expectations. Meanwhile, Jack was left alone with the memories of his mistakes, haunted by the regret of pushing Emma into that dangerous transformation. Every day, he faced the consequences of his choices, realizing too late the price of his selfish demands. Jack was forced to live with the knowledge that he'd lost the one person who had truly cared for him, his own greed leaving him isolated and empty. Emma's story is a powerful reminder of the impact of toxic expectations and the value of self-worth. What did you take away from her journey? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, please give us a thumbs up, share it with friends who might need this reminder, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching.